All of us have our own favorite and least favorite modes in Brawl Stars, but we're talking about everyone who plays Brawl Stars. What game modes are the most liked and least liked in the game? We're gonna go over how well liked every single game mode is in Brawl Stars and how we can improve them. Let's do it. Alright, so what I did is I asked everyone their opinion on every single game mode in Brawl Stars. And when I say that, I mean all ladder game modes, not counting the ticketed events: Bounty, Brawl Ball, Solo Showdown, Duo Showdown, Heist, Gem Grab, and Siege. All 7 game modes in the ladder mode, asking you to rate every game mode 1 through 5. 1 being hate it, 2 being don't like it, 3 being it's okay, 4 being I like it, and 5 being love it. Now I shared it on my community tab on YouTube and on Twitter, and we got over 6,000 people to fill out the survey. So I think we got a really good sample size, enough that's gonna give us a really accurate picture of how well liked every game mode really is in Brawl Stars. But I do also wanna say probably the general population is gonna be a little bit more casual than the people who filled this survey out. But I do still think this is gonna be a pretty accurate depiction of how well liked every game mode actually is. Now really quick, I want you to go ahead, put in the comments, what game modes do you think are gonna be the most liked in Brawl Stars, and what ones do you think are gonna be the least liked? Because opinions definitely varied for a lot of different people. And I know when I filled the survey out too, and mine were definitely different for some of them than what ended up being the actual results for everyone. All right, but let's get into the results. Starting, over 6,000 people filled this out, and starting out with Gem Grab. Gem Grab, turns out, is an overwhelmingly okay mode. It's one of the 2 game modes that's up every single day in ladder, and it's the first one you unlock. There's not a lot of people that really hate it, but there's also not a lot of people that really love it. There's a lot of people that are like, it's an okay mode. There's a decent amount that like it. I was one of the ones, I'm pretty sure I either had as like it, I probably had as like it or love it. Gem Grab was my first game mode and my first love, but they've improved a lot of different game modes since Gem Grab has been released. So while it maybe used to be the old favorite, it doesn't seem to be the favorite at this point in the game. So let's move on. Going to Solo Showdown, what a lot of people probably think is the overwhelming favorite. And well, I don't know if it's the overwhelming favorite, but look at this. It is probably and definitely the favorite game mode in Brawl Stars. Probably not to many people's surprise. It's not the least hated game mode though, although maybe that's also not surprising considering teaming, but it's actually pretty close to a lot of others. Now Duo Showdown, maybe not quite as many people love Duo Showdown, but there's a lot of people, for the most part, think Duo Showdown's pretty good, pretty decent, or at the least, okay. Duo Showdown tied for the lowest amount of people who hate it. Well, tied in the percentage category, not tied in the exact number anyways. Now, Brawl Ball is gonna be the most loved game mode in all of the game. We're just talking about how many people put it at a 5 rating for Brawl Ball. Brawl Ball won that category. Is that what you guys expected? I think it definitely varies a lot of people's opinion on what they like the most. Overall though, Brawl Ball had pretty solid ratings across the board. Maybe slightly worse than Solo Showdown, but not by that much. Next is Siege. Siege does not look very good right now, with the lowest rating, the worst rating for almost everything, it seems like. Siege is not a game mode that many people are enjoying right now. Definitely some people do, and I like Siege, but we're gonna get into why Siege is not very well liked compared to everything else. And let me tell you, Siege's ratings for 1 through 5 is the worst across the board by a good amount. Maybe not in every single category, well, actually in every single category, except for it's okay, which is probably not surprising. That's the most neutral one. So Siege is not doing so well in Brawl Stars, the newest game mode. Now, I do think that means, since it is the newest game mode, that they can continue to make tweaks to improve it, but we'll get into how they can do that and what needs to be done to improve Siege after we get through everything else. Next, it's gonna be Heist. Heist also not looking quite that good, but it's not nearly looking as bad as Siege. although it actually probably has the second worst overall ratings across the board compared to the other game modes. Next, it's gonna be Bounty, with the majority of people saying they either think Bounty is okay or they like Bounty. So nothing really negative, or Bounty had pretty solid ratings, not one of the better ones in any of the categories, but had a high amount of it's okay and they like it, so that can't be too bad. Now we know how well liked each game mode is overall, but let's put that in context. How do the game modes really compare to each other when you stack all of them up together at the same time? One good way to look at this, I think, is to put it into three categories: people who are having a negative experience, a neutral experience, and a positive experience with that game mode in Brawl Stars. So of course, hating it and not liking it would be negative, and loving it and liking it would be positive. And of course, the only other one, thinking it's okay, is going to be the neutral experience. So we're going to find Gem Grab, as I said, is the most okay experience, the most neutral experience in Brawl Stars, and then Solo Showdown is the most positive by far, also the least neutral and the least disliked game mode in Brawl Stars, which I think is interesting because it definitely has the biggest problem category in teaming that gets talked about a ton. Even though it seems to be a huge problem, it seems like it's not really affecting people's opinion of the game mode all that much. It's still by far and away the most liked mode in the game, and there's a good competition for it though, with Brawl Ball being next up with the most liked mode in Brawl Stars. And then we're finding Siege, by far and away the least liked mode in the game. Overall positive experience and negative experience is by far the biggest, worst experience in the game is Siege. It's not even close. Heist, the next up after that. And then we're finding Bounty is pretty much middle of the board. Duo Showdown is also pretty middle of the board. Now I asked you all some other questions as well. Just because a game mode is well liked doesn't necessarily mean you're gonna play it that much, or how much are you really gonna play that game mode. So I asked you, what game mode do you actually play the most? And guess what? It was overwhelmingly Solo Showdown. Over 50% of you said you play Solo Showdown the most. Brawl Ball was the second most played mode. And if you're looking at the percentages between how much you liked Brawl Ball and how much you liked Solo Showdown, well, they were actually really similar. Although, of course, Solo Showdown is up twice as much, but you could binge Brawl Ball, way more when it comes out as well. We're still finding, though, that Solo Showdown is by far the most played mode. We're also finding that even though Siege is the least liked mode, it's not going to be the lowest on this list. Although, hold on, there are a different question for that as well. But I also wanted to ask, I thought, what is your second most played mode? And for this one, it basically is like everyone has their own second favorite mode, and it honestly completely varies. There wasn't a big difference between any of these modes, hardly over a 10% difference between the highest answer and the lowest answer. Brawl Ball did win this category as the second most played mode, which just sort of makes sense, as the second highest and the most played, and then also being really well liked, so there you find it as the highest and the second most played. But overall, everyone seems to have their second favorite mode is going to be pretty varied across the board. But what about this? What is your least played mode? And this is where Siege just takes the cake. It is by far the least played mode. And then I also found surprising is Gem Grab is the second least played mode in Brawl Stars, even though it's one of the two game modes that's up every single day. And then of course followed by Heist, then Duo Showdown, Bounty, Brawl Ball, and then Solo Showdown. Another question I thought was interesting that I wanted to ask all of you was, when playing a 3v3 mode, how often did you play in a team? As in, how often did you not play with randoms? And actually, I was a little bit surprised. I thought there'd be more people who never play with randoms, but only about 10% of people never play with randoms, although the overwhelming majority either rarely play with a team or only sometimes play with a team. That's definitely the overwhelming majority. Only about 25% either always play with a team or often play with a team in a 3v3 mode. As you get higher in trophies, you definitely are more and more inclined to play in a team as opposed to not, although it can definitely be difficult to play with a team. And you'll also see why this question is so relevant when you examine why Siege is really not so well liked. But look, if we want to make Brawl Stars the amazing game that we know it can be, I mean, look, it's a great game, but we want it to fully reach its potential. We need to understand, why is Solo Showdown so well liked, and why is Siege so well disliked, by far not even close to any other game mode? Well, I asked you all this question as well in my community, in a community post on my page, and I got a lot of really good responses. Thank you so much to everyone who took the time to write up a response. And I saw a lot of common themes among both questions. First of all, in Solo Showdown, I think this is a pretty obvious one, right? But by far and away, one of the most popular reasons why people love Solo Showdown is you can play by yourself. Not only do you not have to rely on anyone else, how well you do, you control, for the most part, how well you do. On top of that, you also don't have to wait to try and find teammates or to try and find good teammates. Sometimes you can find teammates, maybe they're not that good. Solo Showdown doesn't even matter, you rely completely on yourself. Another really common answer in Solo Showdown was that it has a really varied meta. There's a lot of different brawlers you can play, and you can do well, it feels like, with almost every single brawler, or at the least, well, maybe this is an add-on point, the maps change the meta in Solo Showdown a lot. Depending on the map is going to change what brawlers are strong, and that's one of the reasons people like it so much, is there's always different maps for different brawlers, so depending on the day, there's going to be different meta for that map, and it just feels like in Solo Showdown as a whole, there's a lot of, you can play every brawler at least somewhere and have strong success. On top of that, people also did like event modifiers. I think it just is another thing that adds a twist to the game mode that keeps it fresh, keeps it varied, and also can help vary up that meta. And you know, maybe you have a map that's good for a specific type of brawler, you add in that event modifier, and suddenly it's a totally different meta for that map. I think that's a great way to keep that game mode fresh. Now, Siege, on the other hand, why is it that people really don't like it? I mean, I think an obvious reason is that there's a very huge risk. So if you're playing with randoms, it just almost doesn't feel worth it to even play because you're spending twice the amount of time to get twice the loss, and it just hurts so much more. And if you get bad teammates, all of a sudden you gotta suffer through that whole match. On top of that though, just like in Solo Showdown, how there's such a varied meta, in Siege, it really feels like the meta is not that varied, and the maps don't seem to have that big of an influence on it either. Maybe it has a small influence, but for the overall part, brawlers that can make a dive on the enemy safe and control brawlers seem to by far and away be the best brawlers for the majority of the maps in Siege. So the meta in Siege is pretty stale. On top of that, one of the biggest complaints about Siege, besides those two things, was how big of an impact the last robot has. It seems like the last robot, you can be controlling the game for the first two or first three robots, and then that last robot just makes you lose, and you can feel like, you know, you were dominating or you were winning the game for the first 2/3 of it or first 3/4 of it, and then all of a sudden you lost and you can't do anything about it. Or maybe you have a lot of bolts for that last wave, but you don't win it, and it feels like that fight was kind of useless. So I think that is a really big problem in Siege, is how big of an impact that last robot has. On a smaller side, some other things people complained about was the penny mortar. I think that being the only thing that can hit the Ike turret by itself without any help is kind of overpowered by itself. Also, the randomness of bolts is definitely a factor in how much people like that mode. People didn't really like how random the bolt spawn is. You can be completely dominating a side, and if it doesn't even spawn over there, what does it matter? So that's definitely an unpleasant part about Siege. Now look, Siege is a new game mode, so I think it's fair to say that there's a lot of room for improvement. Just like with any new game mode, there's always ways to make it better. Brawl Ball went through a lot of changes, Heist went through changes, Bounty even went through changes, so I think Siege is gonna improve. But how are we going to get Siege to that point where we really enjoy the mode? I think first of all, you have to try and solve some sort of way about that last robot having such a big impact on the course of the game. That is definitely one of the biggest problems. There's a couple ways you can go about it. One, on the very last wave, you could potentially have both sides spawn a robot. However many bolts you have is how strong the robot is going to be, and both sides get that robot. That could be one way to solve that issue. The other way, another potential way, and I'm not sure how I feel about this, is to have, after every single wave, you have bolts cancel each other out. So for example, if one team has 5 bolts, the other team has 3 at the end of a wave, they cancel each other out. So you go 5 minus 3, so the winning team has a level 2 robot. It would be, you would go like that for every single wave. You just have every bolt cancel each other out, until there's so many bolts left and that side gets that robot for whatever level that is. Now this would make it less uneven and you wouldn't have those leftover bolts. You would also have way less stronger robots, so that would definitely change up how Siege works. The Ike turret would probably be more overpowered. Maybe you'd have to change how strong the Ike turret is, but then if you do that, then diving on the safe is even stronger. So I'm not entirely sure if that's the best solution. You could also have bolts just completely reset after every single wave, but I don't really feel like that's the best solution either, because whatever team, even if you have like a 5-4 count at the end of a wave, that team that has the 5 is going to end up with a big advantage just by getting that robot. It's going to allow them to really get control of the center of the map, and I don't think that's completely fair to reset it completely. You could have a partial reset. I could see a partial reset, maybe a 70, like you lose 25% of your bolts after a wave, after a robot spawns. That could be fine. But they also need to find a way to really change up the meta in Siege, because right now it's fairly stale and the maps don't really change up the meta that much. I do think they could get a little more creative with the maps, but it's definitely difficult to get really creative when you have that huge Ike turret line and there's only a small area where the bolts can spawn, so it's hard to get super creative. Potentially you could do it with event modifiers. Maybe you add not the same event modifiers Showdown has, but specific event modifiers just for Siege. Maybe you could add a smaller energy drink. That would be the one event modifier you could probably carry over. But if you could have, like, someone suggested bolt modifiers where you pick up a bolt and you get a really short modifier duration to yourself, like more damage, damage reduction, higher speed, whatever. You could keep on going different ways. That could be something to change up the meta in Siege. But the other really big problem in Siege is the huge risk, and especially associated with randoms. I have two solutions for this. One, if you're playing with randoms, whenever you win, you get 10% more trophies, and whenever you lose, you get 10%. You lose 10% less trophies. This could be one way. I do think you could potentially rig it though at the top of matchmaking by being really high trophies, and then just once you finally get in with the rigged team, you just keep on pressing play again. So maybe that's not the best solution, but I do think it would work for the majority of players, just giving it less risk when you play with randoms. The other thing I think you could do is, in this past update, they added an improvement to matchmaking where if you're playing with a team, you get harder matchmaking. Now, I think they need to go a step further, but just in Siege. Whatever they did to make it harder matchmaking for teams, in other words, easier matchmaking for randoms, they need to make that even further in Siege. So make it even easier matchmaking if you're playing with randoms. Whatever they did there, extend it further in Siege to just make it easier for random. Now, I didn't have time to go over how to improve every single game mode in this video, but I do go over a lot of different ways to improve Brawl Stars in that playlist right over there. That's gonna be it for today's video though. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll catch you later.